I just want to do a quick preamble and say that while AI and machine learning have been in development for decades, it really burst into our consciousness in the last 3-4 years. With consumer-facing services like ChatGPT and models released such as Llama, Claude, and Anthropic, and all kinds of other work that's being released. And there's been such a race to release new models, new services across the world, in the US in particular. It's turned the world upside down in terms of discussions on the future of mankind and the harms and benefits of AI. So in this panel, we'll specifically look at the impact AI can have on humanities and humankind, art, philosophy, writing, and so much more. And to do this, we have this amazing distinguished panel of experts in the humanities, entrepreneurship, and philosophy. AI really should be for mankind and should be for good. So we'll discuss the impacts of AI. We'll spend about 20 minutes on the questions that we've prepared, and then we'll throw it to the audience. So please be ready to ask questions of us. So with that, I want to start off by saying, what are the significance and consequences of AI for the humanities, both good and bad? And could you all comment on that? And there are 2 mics, and if you could kindly share those mics. Want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Couple of clarifications. I'm a senior advisor at OpenAI, and I did help the company enter India last year, and I'm a professor and a member of the faculty at Virginia Tech. Let's go Hokies, not Georgia Tech. Important for those of you who know the Hokie Nation. I think the advent of AI actually presents a rare opportunity for the humanities to bring to the foreground what has long been true in the background. I studied history as an undergraduate. My career was fueled by the liberal arts and the humanities, yet I've spent my entire career as an entrepreneur and leader in the digital landscape. I was one of Google's first employees in India 20 years ago. I was Twitter's first leader in Asia 10 to 12 years ago. I've started venture capital firms, and most recently advised OpenAI in India. What I observed in the technology landscape pre-ChatGPT was that the superpower in technology was one's ability to introspect, to imagine, to storytell, and yes, story listen. Whether you're developing new products, conducting user research, entering new markets. Steve Jobs, of course, famously talked about Apple as existing on humanities avenue and technology street. But what we don't often say is that the founder of Reddit was a history major, the founder of AOL, a politics major, the founders of Airbnb, designers, the founder of LinkedIn, a philosophy major. So the liberal arts have long been a fuel for global Silicon Valley, for me included. The rise of AI, I think, actually presents us with an interesting window of opportunity where it dramatizes this truth such that when you look ahead 10 years and you're in a meeting room in the year 2035 and someone says something breakthrough, cutting, compelling, visionary, what will we reflect on what she or he said? Will it be that they had financial or spreadsheet or software programming prowess? I don't think so. I think we'll be reflecting on their ability to communicate, present, think in a deeply felt human way. That's why at Virginia Tech last year, I founded the world's first executive degree in the humanities. Think about that. I have technology leaders from Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft, Zillow, Citigroup, and TikTok coming to Virginia Tech to study creative writing, literature, history, philosophy, and religion as a way to grow their leadership, because they know that the superpower of the future in this AI ascendant era lies in and around the humanities.
That sounds great. I want to focus on a slightly different aspect of it, namely, I also think that it's a great opportunity for the humanities, but not so much focusing on opportunities for humanities majors and companies, but rather it's an opportunity to make progress on some of the long-standing unresolved questions that the humanities are trying to answer, namely to try to understand the human condition and what's special about being human. And the way I think of this is the following. So just if you imagine that we would ever encounter an alien species coming to Earth, that would be highly instructive, not just about learning about the alien species, but also learning about ourselves. Because you can contrastively study the aliens and ourselves by thinking about, what are the similarities and what are the differences. And so far, this contrastive study of humanity has mostly been with non-human animals. No other alien species has ever arrived on Earth. We've been contrasting ourselves with non-human animals, but non-human animals are very similar in many ways to human beings. They're biological creatures. They evolved, in the same way as we did, but they don't have some of the most crucial aspects of that humans have, like producing art and language and things like that. But now is the opportunity to study a completely different alien form of intelligence and contrast humanity with that form of intelligence. So I like to think of this as like contrastive humanities. You study the human condition by contrasting it with this new form of intelligence that's arising, that's completely different, or likely, or possibly completely different than our human intelligence. It's not based on biological selection. It's not optimized for energy and being efficient with the calories that you find in the world. It's possibly a completely different setup. So this is, I think, the most interesting potential aspect in making progress in some of the old questions about humanity. Contrasting with a new form of intelligence that's very different from the past contrasts.
So I would agree with my fellow panelists in all of their comments, but I come to the idea of AI as somewhat of a skeptic also. I also accept its inevitability, and I see it as a fantastic potential tool and existing tool for those of us in the humanities and for all kinds of walks of life and research and enterprises. I also worry a bit about the predominance of AI, as I worry about lots of things, and that's what we in the humanities do. We worry a lot. And we are skeptics, and that's, I think, a very healthy kind of skepticism. So what we did at the National Humanities Center in the past couple of years, with a grant from Google, we were happy to take some of their guilt money. And we now are working with 19 universities across the country to establish, and the courses began last year to be taught, undergraduate courses in responsible AI. And the idea of bringing issues of ethics and social harmony and the social good to bear on questions of AI, I think, are incredibly important. Where does AI substitute for the human? Where does it extend the human? Where does it exist as the post-human? How can it help us in solving human-created issues like planetary crisis, like climate change, etc.? I think these are all huge questions that we have to interrogate. And the humanities is very good at interrogation, and it's also very good at bridging disparate ways of thinking that people didn't think about bringing together previously. And that bridging is also very important. But putting that ethical frame around issues of AI is what we in the humanities strive to do, and what's so very seriously important to do.
Absolutely. So my question is, are there scenarios in which AI's impact on humanity is more incremental than the bold predictions that the early 2020s are suggesting? There's been both bad and good suggestions. It's going to destroy humankind, but at the same time, it's going to magically, solve all of our problems. So are there any incremental scenarios that you see?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's okay right now to embrace the unknown. You know, I think what's really wonderful about this moment in time and conversations like these is that we're discussing the implications of AI up front and in the main, and not later and off stage. You know, I worked at Twitter 12 years ago, and I wish there were, you know, for the first couple of decades of this century, we framed the internet and all things digital with a utopian spirit. We're not self-actualizing around and being self-critical, actually. And I think the question in and of itself, I think is valuable. And you know, you can go both ways on this. There are many people that think that the big AI moment is still ahead of us. You know, a lot of these models have been trained on text and media, but imagine training a model on protein sequences and seeing big pharma and biotech companies able to aim and recalibrate R&D dollars and the like. So I think there are scenarios in which, you know, this in 10 years is transformational. There may be scenarios in some industries where it's incremental. I mean, the industry most impacted by AI to date is technology itself. It's where you're seeing programming and coding in particular undergoing lots of transformation. But I think overall, I'm of the believer that, you know, we're not entering a world where you'll see companies shrinking by 20%. You'll see 80% of the people at least 20% more productive.
But it is moving much, much faster than other transformations that we've had, such as the internet or printing press and, you know, other transformations. So you still see an incremental change happening.
I'm acknowledging the possibility of both. I'm not going to pundit and answer in one way or another. What I'm suggesting is that it's valuable to be having the conversation and reason people can disagree. One of the things that I find most interesting, Thomas, about what you said earlier, is that, you know, a lot of people ask me, what are the humanities? When we contemplate this question of the humanities and AI, in fact, to me, it's not about majors and minors. I wrote a poem a year ago to describe the humanities. I describe it as awe and wonder in the other. All education and experiences that anchor humans in others, be they super intelligent others or human others, are a superpower. We live in a culture of mirrors, short form, self-involved. The humanities offer us a culture of windows about human others and long form. And I thought your comment was really striking about what we might learn from studying a technological other.
Anyone else wants to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I completely agree with this. I think we have to keep in mind that there's so much uncertainty about the future here that there's definitely scenarios where, you know, it's going to be incremental, it's going to be slower than people predict, but it's also possible that it's going to be a rapid, immediate, transformative change in 3 years down the road. So there's a couple of areas where, you know, it's completely conceivable that there is a radical breakthrough that will change a lot of things. So for example, mathematics is one of the straightforward examples, I think, that, you know, it's conceivable, possible that in a few years, you know, there will be massive mathematical breakthroughs done by AI, and that would change tremendously a lot of things in science and so on and so forth. And it's also possible that that's not going to happen. You know, it's going to be useful for finding new proofs and things like that, but it's not going to be totally transformative. So there's just so much uncertainty. So certainly there are scenarios imaginable where it's incremental and other ones where it's not, and it's very hard to say what's going to happen.
Yeah, we're at the precipice of all this.
I'd like to answer that question somewhat circuitously by picking up on what Rishi was mentioning about in his wonderful poem about defining the humanities. And to me, the definition of the humanities is that they are our stories. They're the repository for our stories. They're also the means for investigating those stories and studying how we disseminate those stories. And also they contain all of the instruments for creating new stories. I was very struck last night when I was listening to Jhumpa Lahiri's comment about living in liminal spaces. And it strikes me that the humanities also are very concerned with these liminal spaces. They allow us to flit across boundaries of space and time and identity very, very easily via narrative. And that's a very strong power that they have. we who study the humanities, who are practitioners of the humanities, who do research in the humanities, are also sort of masters of ambiguity. And we're masters of complexity. And we're masters of nuance. And this is where I think in the current status of a lot of AI, that stuff gets lost. Mm-hmm. And perhaps nefariously, perhaps dangerously in terms of misuse, how it can be lost. And one example I'll give is this. There now exists AI therapists. So, one doesn't necessarily via Zoom to a therapist who is a human. One can do it via an AI. And there's a really interesting story I was hearing about interactions with AI therapists where the patient was talking about trying to, in his language, jump a bridge. And he meant cross a bridge. And the AI therapist threw up the suicide hotline right away. So the nuance is very, very important here. And I think this is something that both incrementally and in sort of massive sweeps, we have to be very, very attentive to in terms of being responsible in our uses.
Which really brings up a question that I hadn't thought of, which is, what kind of collaboration are you seeing between the humanities and technologists to build this kind of ethics and philosophy and abstraction that humanities bring to the table? Are you seeing technologists reach out to humanities to collaborate on these systems?
I can start. One of the things that we do at the National Humanities Center is we typically host about 35 scholars from all over the world annually. It's through a very robust competition. We usually get about 600 applications, accept about 5% of those people, and they usually work on a book project during the academic year. Increasingly, we see applications, proposals where people want to respond to the current crises of the time. The climate change crisis, immigration crisis, racial issues, border issues, et cetera, et cetera. And what we increasingly find, of course, is that these are not one-dimensional solutions. They are multidisciplinary solutions that require a humanities perspective. And quite frankly, I feel that the departments, university departments, in a couple of decades will be built around these kinds of issues. We will have departments of environmental studies. We will have departments of cognitive studies. We will have departments of border studies. We will have departments of information theory, et cetera. And they will be sort of scatterings of people from different previous departments, different disciplines in conversation with humanities perspectives. And I see that as extremely, extremely important.
A lot of multidisciplinary conversations. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. So we have fellowships now that are in, for example, humanities, medicine, and technology. We have people working across those various disciplines, and we have people that want to support those various disciplines. And our conferences have been on AI, on the planetary climate crisis, on healthcare, et cetera. These are multidisciplinary initiatives.
I think, Nithya, my reflection on your great question is I think there's room to grow. I don't see enough. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons is that you don't see enough technologists crossing the bridge or jumping the bridge, Robert, to humanities land, is because the humanities are perceived as kind of the ethics department. Yeah. You call the humanists when you're wrestling with a moral quandary. That is a terrible way for us to cast and frame and dress ourselves up for the coming decades, which is why the argument I'm making is that a lifelong commitment to the humanities is actually what has powered innovation, technological innovation for decades. You know, one of the things I find really interesting is that the genesis of organizations like the National Humanities Center, where I honored to serve as vice chair, the genesis of this nation's National Endowment for the Humanities, our state humanities councils, our humanities infrastructure in this country dates back to the height of the Cold War. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, at kind of technocratic peak, said, what we also ought to invest in as a nation is the humanities, not because they help us solve, not because they're the ethics department, but because the humanities are a way to ensure we know what it means to lead a good life, and that they can power success not only in our interior lives, but yes, our industrial lives too. And so one of my worries is that the conversation about AI and AI policy, you know, when you throw in the humanities, you mean ethics, there's no concurrent conversation around what will it mean to live a good human life in 10 years, and how might the humanities actually not just power, you know, ethical progress, but technological progress too. So I think there's real opportunity to reframe and reintroduce the humanities, and we have a window of opportunity to get it right.
Well said. Thomas?
Yeah. Oh, is it still on? Yeah. So yeah, I really agree with that point that we cannot just think of the humanities as ethics, but my sense is that that is the most in-demand part of connecting industry with the humanities. So a lot of people are aware that there are all these pitfalls in deploying machine learning models that could perpetuate bias and discrimination and things like that. And people have a strong interest in, getting a good sense of the ethical dangers here. And that is something I think there is some demand coming from industry. So people get, invited to participate in workshops and conferences that are about this. The other parts of the humanities, I don't see that much connection. So, but I fully agree with you. There's a lot of room for growth and potential there for benefit.
So my role has been more on the open source side, so that AI becomes more open, accessible, transparent, so to really accelerate innovation, but also reduce bias and reduce risks with opaqueness of AI. But let me get to another question, which really came from Rishi. How should countries of the East and Global South, including India, be preparing for a world in which systems with super intelligence abound? It really deepens the digital divide, for God's sake.
Yeah, I think it can, and I think the next few years are really interesting if you think at global scale. We're not the only country contemplating what do we do with AI. Robert and I were just in India a few months ago visiting with many, many leaders in the country talking about these same issues. But I think it is wonderful that a lot of countries are seeing this as a moment and are ready to build their own models and superintelligences and ensure that models are trained on local languages. There are a number of nations in the world that are using the rise of AI to essentially advance language preservation as a way to keep a language alive, actually. But I think the questions that nations are asking around AI, how can AI advance educational outcomes, health outcomes, those are all questions that I hope many nations are asking. In India, there's the India AI mission. There's a lot happening in India. But an underlying question, which is kind of the one I'm getting at, is sort of what are humans going to be up to in 10 years, in 20 years, right? Robert and I spoke 100 days ago at IIT Bombay, one of India's most prestigious institutions. And the number of young people graduating from IIT Bombay that came to us afterwards saying they couldn't find a job, were unable to find jobs. These are IIT Bombay graduates. I think it's a 0.2% acceptance rate. Tells us a lot about our modern moment. And so I would hope that in the global East, you have nations not just thinking about AI in functional terms. How might AI accelerate developmental progress? Great. But also contemplate this more macro question, which is a theme of the panel, which is how do we prepare our human talent pool, our human capacity, our human assets to thrive and be well in that era? One way to think about this last part of my reflection here is, what does the full stack human of the future look like? In tech, we think in terms of stacks, the front end, the back end, the APIs, OS, hardware, et cetera. Well, what does the full stack human of the future look like? The applied layer will necessarily have to be someone who's fluent in today's tech. But my argument is that the infrastructure layer of that future human, full stack human, might be the humanities and liberal arts.
So reflecting on just the impact of possible superintelligence on the global south, I think one crucial question will be whether or not that level of intelligence will be available to everybody or will be hoarded by the most powerful countries. Most likely the powerful will try to keep it to themselves and reap all the benefits. If it becomes open, it becomes available to all, then the impact is much less clearly predictable, but it will probably be more beneficial, leading to more equality. If it's hoarded by just a few, they will probably reap the benefits, and then differences in wealth will likely increase. So I think this is going to be a crucial moment about whether or not the benefits of potential superintelligence will be accessible to all or will be hidden to a few.
Absolutely. Please.
Well, I was going to say, Rishi brought up a very happy memory. I mean, I think our whirlwind tour of Mumbai and Delhi a few months ago, where we spoke about 3 or 4 times a day on various panels and at various universities and in various kinds of interactions. What I was most struck by and found reassuring was how many students did not want to let us go. After the conversations, they followed us to our driver. They were fascinated by bridging their technological education with a more sort of humanities perspective and humanities focus, and I think that was extremely important. So to kind of respond to the question, I was thinking of a wonderful science fiction novel by an author named Kim Stanley Robinson called Ministry of the Future. That I read about a year ago. And it's a novel that begins with the crisis of climate change in the not too distant future and a massive heat wave that is in India. And it is so massive and so devastating that it's causing massive deaths and deprivation and diasporas, etc. And this begins, of course, to spread throughout the world. And the question of the novel is, how do we deal with this? And the novel is ultimately quite optimistic. It has humankind rallying to respond to the crisis of climate change. And basically, there are a group of environmental activists that start shooting commercial airliners out of the sky. Again, you cannot use fossil fuels anymore, et cetera, and there's a lot of activism that takes place. And this is really quite interesting. And it is one possible scenario for the future that, of course, would naturally involve AI. Another alternative scenario, of course, with all that, when we have those kind of tremendous crises, it opens the door for demagoguery, and it opens the doors for dictatorships. And we are at an inflection point, not just in our country, but throughout the world, in many countries, around those various issues. And therefore, I go back to my original point about the use of ethics and the importance of in a humanities conversation in all of these technological advancements to make sure that we are cognizant of the various possible alternatives that we're dealing with.
We could go on and on forever, but I want to turn to the audience and see if there are any audience questions.
Hi, thank you. Great discussion. My name is Ravi Kalkunte. Consider myself AI challenged for sure. I want to put you on the spot. We hear a lot about uncertainty. What can you tell me certainly what is going to happen?
You want to take a stab?
Yeah, go. You can start.
No, I mean, certainty, I mean, it's a philosophically contested word, but so like reasonably certain about the near future You can be that, AI tools will help people be more productive. They will help people make advances. They will help in science. They will change, social media and influencing and the production of various works and so on and so forth. But this is all, present and next year. Much further into the future, it becomes quite uncertain.
I would say, coming a bit from the world of business, the back office of business is changing rapidly. So from a customer service standpoint, from a customer relationship management standpoint, from a sales prospecting standpoint, you're going to be going to small business and business websites and seeing their phone numbers, their address, their social media, and their AI. That is coming. The businesses are investing heavily in these tools to ensure they are able to service customers and their market opportunity more efficiently. Whether in the future you have companies, we have avatars and drug development has changed dramatically. Sam Altman, I'd encourage you all to read an essay Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, wrote a week ago, where he described that what's really limiting the growth of AI is chips, electricity, and human will. We're here contemplating human will, but there are a lot of open questions that remain around the availability and efficacy of the electricity grid, and certainly chips as well, not just here in the United States, but around the world.
Next question.
Hi. As a recent creative writing graduate, I've been thinking a lot about the way that AI has been used to do different kinds of art, and there was a bunch of stuff online about how AI was using other people's art from Instagram and TikTok to create their own versions, and people were paying them for that instead of commissioning the artists. And people online have been trying to write books with AI. Do you have any ideas on, how successful, if they will actually be able to take over or do creative jobs in that way to the same capacity that human beings are capable of?
Well, I would ask the question back to you as a creative, what you think of the quality. I think you're right that there is a wave of AI showing up in our content feeds. I think Facebook just recently announced that now when you're scrolling through Facebook and Instagram in the future, you'll see content from what you follow, you'll see content from your interests, and then you'll see AI-generated content for you. What that is that you might share with a friend, and so that world is coming. I will say though, one of the things that I have been struck by in the last couple of years, and certainly being in the internet industry the last couple of decades, is that humans have a very strong authenticity radar. I've just been struck by that, having kind of watched the rise of YouTube in the last 20 years, watched the number of nations around the world conduct elections, right? This is a year, India, the United States, there's something like 65 elections happening this year. And in aggregate, electorates have not been affected by AI-generated content. People have figured out that this is actually funny and AI-generated. So I think creativity will certainly change. There's lots of interesting questions of copyright. You all should read the briefs that the New York Times and OpenAI have filed in their litigations. Very interesting reading and lots of open questions, and sorry to anchor in uncertainty.
Okay. Hi, my name is Vinayak. I have a background in medical humanities, but also humanities integration within STEM fields broadly. One of the challenges, I did this work in India and now over here, so one of the challenges I faced in India was, I cited some of the examples when talking to STEM majors, STEM undergrads that you mentioned at the beginning of your talk. I talked about complexity with medical students, the tolerance for uncertainty. The challenge is that a lot of these students in undergrads are from working class, a majority of them are from working class families, and for them to see the immediate benefit of taking an elective in literature or art history versus data analytics, it's an uphill task. So you mentioned the IIT graduates. I just want to know if there's any insight that you have in becoming a better advocate for humanities within these fields.
I appreciate that question. I think the quick answer is, let's not fight this battle on what are you majoring in, what are you minoring in. That's the wrong front. Yes, of course, I'd love to see more classics majors than computer science majors. That's me personally. That's not the right, for me to sit in the shoes of a 17-year-old, to your point, a lifelong commitment to serious experiences where you're cultivating your humanities muscle, the muscles of communication, storytelling, story listening, expression, empathy, imagination, introspection, you can do that on YouTube now, right? There are, YouTube is a mini university as far as I can tell. There's so many wonderful lectures, including from Dr. Newman here, and I'm sure from you as well, Thomas. So I think for young people, it's far more advantageous for us to not be speaking in terms of what are you majoring in or what course are you but speak in terms of micro-credentials, speak in terms of lowercase experiences, which is in part what I've built at Virginia Tech.
Thomas and Robert, anything to add?
I just would echo what Rishi said, and also talk about the skill sets that one learns in the humanities: communication skills, adaptability skills. One is not going to stay in the same job throughout one's career as our grandparents did, for example. Their jobs will change, they will morph. And having the problem solving and adaptability skills, as well as the communication skills that we have in the humanities, that we train in the humanities, the ability to focus, the ability to do close reading, the ability to pay attention, the ability to listen. These are essential skill sets. In medicine, we know that first-year medical students don't just study gross anatomy. They study narrative. So they learn how to take a case history effectively. And that's an essential skill set. So having the humanities sort of infiltrate into all aspects of training is, I think, essential for a student to be successful in one's career.
Can I make one comment to the question right before this one? Not so much about the skill set, but about art. So I feel like that the debate about AI-generated art, and so you brought up some of it. I forgot who the question. Yeah, right, exactly. So you brought some of it about the idea of copyright and so on and so forth. But then there was also the question about how successful will this be, this AI-generated art, as a work of art. And I think that is one of the slightly neglected, but I think really important questions. So there is the potential that AI-generated art could achieve greater aesthetic value than the human-generated art. Kind of like, AI chess playing has achieved superhuman levels. It's in principle possible that AI-generated art could achieve superhuman artistic levels. It's not so obvious how to do that, but there are potential ways. So actually, I'm actually working on this. So I mean, theoretically, not actually building it, so there are potential ways of trying to achieve that that I think is one of the great, because we could achieve new levels of music that say, surpass what ordinary humans can create, or even possibly the best composers could create with the help of AI. And that would really add a tremendous amount of value to the world. So that's one aspect, I think, that should not be neglected about the potential for AI-generated art, rather than, say, the dangers.
I think it's like when photography was introduced, and it really disrupted the actual art of painting, and people said, oh, this is going to replace it. No, it just creates another genre of art. But I know we can go on discussing this for a long time, but we have to end this discussion and move on to the next one. I just want to thank all of you for an incredible conversation.